welcome everybody to another Meekono Fireside Chat. Today we have the pleasure of hosting the lovely Patricia Okelo. Patricia is a Kenyan entrepreneur, author, and mentor dedicated to empowering women in business. She's the founder of Kayana, Nairobi's premier women's accelerator committed to SDG 5, which is gender equality. Patricia is also the author of A Candid Handbook for Women Doing Business in Kenya. With a strong background in advertising, branding, and events, Patricia has spent over 2 decades helping women navigate the challenges of entrepreneurship. She combines international training with local insights to build communities where women entrepreneurs can thrive. She's been recognized among Kenya's top 100 most influential women and continues to shape the entrepreneurial ecosystem through her mentorship circles, training, and advocacy. And I'm personally blessed to actually call Patricia a friend as well. So Patricia, welcome to the podcast. I'm really, really excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Daphne. Excited and looking forward to this conversation. Really, really excited.
Okay, great.
And I'll take the intro and use it in other things. I like that intro.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. So Pat, I want us to get, because I know we're going to have so much to discuss, but before we dive into offering advice and, giving insights into the women in our community, can you share with those who don't already know a little bit about your journey? What were some of your early experiences? What shaped you into the entrepreneur and mentor that you are today? And how do they connect to your current work with creative entrepreneurs?
Okay, super. I was born many years ago. Have always had a love for art and drawing, although my dad is a lawyer and my mom a nurse, so traditional kind of like parents. But I always drew from when I was really little. I loved to draw, I loved to paint, and basically using that side of my brain. So going into school, enjoyed everything about school really. But the thing that I loved, that I did with the most ease, was really when fine art and around, really fine art. And so that's what I ended up doing in the university. I studied here in Kenya, KU, Kenyatta University, and did my BA in fine art. There was, what can I say? It was an interesting experience because I majored in graphic design, but however, I did not touch a computer in my 4 years at the university, typical African story. And what happened is that during the uni years, I met. I did a job. I had a job because our universities, because of the riots, etc. We would go for like 1 year and then be out for like 9 months. And during that time, I actually got a job. And the person I worked with was a British engineer. And when I told him that I was studying fine art, he was like, "Oh, so what software are you using?" And I'm like, "Software, what?" We paint everything by hand and do everything by hand. And he was like, "Forget it. I mean, the way the world is going, you definitely will need to learn some software." So he then traveled to the UK, came with all this Adobe, huge volumes of books, and I had to teach myself. And that's really my degree, I would say, was that learning experience of learning how to use all this software, and then eventually using it as in that business to sell, and he earned money from our skill basically. But we paid us, and that's how I paid my way through the university. Upon graduation, I then worked in a media house in NTV. We were one of the first employees that were hired when the TV station was just getting its license, and I was a graphic producer there. Did a year of that, but that's the same year I met my husband, and so literally just worked for a year and gave up that and a Reuters scholarship to move in and be a wife. And that was around 25 years ago. And so while there, my mom-in-law, who's an entrepreneur, really encouraged me to continue to, all through university and high school, I was always, painting and drawing, doing bookmarks and stuff like that, and I would sell it for pocket money. But my mom-in-law, who's an entrepreneur, was like, "Hey, Pat, you can actually make a business out of this." So started doing really sort of selling my services, so to speak, and mainly to corporates. And so that's how my first business started, was offering graphic design services for corporates. And that was when I was living. Now I had moved and I was living in Mombasa with my husband, where he was working at the time. And that's how my first business started, and that's how I got into the world of graphic design and advertising, and offering below the line services for corporate companies that didn't want to use the huge agencies, or didn't have the budgets for it either. But at that time, being a freelancer was just beginning to become a thing, and so that's how my first business started. Yeah.
I'm actually going to put a pin in what you said about how you from the very beginning you were dealing with corporates, because that's obviously of interest to Meekono, being a business that connects creatives with corporate and sort of enterprise type of clients. So we're going to put a pin on that, because I'm sure we'll be digging into your experience of dealing with people in corporate environments. But before we jump that far ahead, I'm curious to know, you talked about how your mother-in-law is an entrepreneur and she encouraged you to jump straight in. And I know in the past you've said how an idea doesn't have to be 100% ready before you launch. Could you give us some examples of how that has actually manifested in your journey, especially in the early journey in the early part of your creative career? How starting before everything was perfect has worked out for you?
Yeah, so definitely, I'm not a perfectionist. I do aim for excellence, but I don't suffer from overthinking a lot of things. That's not, and maybe that has made it a lot easier for me in this journey. So as long as I receive a lot of encouragement, I'm very likely to start. So I think the thing that I knew is, because I had already started, I had sold my work before, right? Yeah. So I knew that I could sell my stuff. And maybe then the challenge would be, can I sell my services to a large organization? That would have been maybe the only doubtful kind of space that I would have said that I would be in. However, my husband at the time was working for a multinational, and he kind of like knew the things that I needed to do to start my company in order for these multinationals to hire me as a company. So he knew I couldn't go in as Pat, and therefore I had to register a corporate company that had a VAT number, and a certificate and those basic things. So I did that quite quickly in the journey, which ideally many people don't do. You kind of like start selling it. So I did that really early in the journey. So I registered the business, and I registered with a tax number. And therefore, the corporates could then use me, because they're required to do that, to then for my graphic design services. So that's generally how I jumped into corporate work. Did I have a business card? Because those are the days of business card. Did I have a website? Did I have a company? No, but I was a graphic designer. So one of the first things I did was get myself a little business card with my, mobile number on it, or for easy access. And that was the number and then we still had landlines at the time. So there was also a landline number as well that they could reach me, because we were not calling people on mobiles for some reason those days. So we would just call the landline. So there was a landline number, which of course I would pick because it would ring in my house. And and that's generally how we started the business. So I did all my stationery, all my design work. I did it on the computer that I had, and just started really sending these out. Another thing that really worked, well, this was about a year, 2 years later, however, was I got a company email address, and those were still the dial-up days. And so I would prepare a ton of, spam, which is not, spam wasn't a thing then, but it's now spam. And I would just send it out to info addresses that were in a directory, and say, hey, this is Willa Productions Limited, and we offer below the line advertising. And I literally sent those out. So we didn't have anything. The only thing I had is my skill set, computer, and the skill set of, which I still have till today, of stalking people. So that's it. That's what we started with.
You forgot that with stalking comes a thick skin. I guess you grew that over time, because I'm telling you, rejection at scale.
Yeah. That's true.
And then leading into this is all I had. You talked about, I think you recently did an interview with Google Africa, and you mentioned that entrepreneurs launch should launch at 60 to 80% ready and let customer feedback shape the rest. So could you tell our audience, who are often underfunded? I mean, one of the biggest challenges of the creative of businesses within the creative space is underfunding. How can they practically use the example you've given and to get feedback, because they don't have enough funding to maybe do a lot of product development iteration, but how can they actually use feedback to improve their products without spending too much money on untested products and ideas?
So I'm really curious about this because about your question, and it's simply because if and this is how I would look at it. I'm an artist or somebody who's doing production. I would be very quick to go to market with any product that's going to be used by anybody else, because the biggest problem that artists and creators have is falling in love with their product and then being unable to then sell the product because of the amount of love that you've invested in it. So I worry a little bit if somebody wants to bring a perfect product for somebody else's use or enjoyment, then it begins worrisome because the product is not being made for yourself, it's being made for other people. So it should go to market pretty quick. However, being a creative, I do understand that there's a sense that there's a little bit of yourself in everything that you make here, and receiving feedback that you feel may water down your creative process. I get that. Yeah, I'm a fine artist. I was in class with many painters who would actually, paint their product and would never want to show it before the exhibition day, which is very different, I would say, from creating products for a mass market, so to speak. Yeah. So while we need to separate the two items. There's arts for art's sake, which is you're a creative and you just want people to enjoy your art in a gallery and you can charge whatever you want for it. That's a really different process. That's not what we're talking about. We're now talking about a product that you're creating that is going to be used by many people, and that needs to go out as quickly as possible. We can call it iteration in business, but in a creative process, you want to know that that what you've made can be used in the way that you envision it being used, and I think that needs to happen pretty quick. I think also we also fall in love with aspects of our products. For example, we may say that we're using, just because I'm wearing a glazed necklace, with this, like, we have to wait for this imported glaze to come from, I don't know where glaze comes from, before it comes to market. And nobody else may notice that very subtle color difference that you're talking about in a mass product. Yeah. And it's good to test it and see, well, this is the shade that I was looking for, but I didn't quite get it, yeah, because of maybe the production process, the problem in the production process. Share it with somebody else and see, is that the most important thing to them, or is there something else around the necklace or whatever you're creating that actually is more important to them? For example, weight, does it sit right? Things like that. So that is really what I mean when I say take it to market as quickly as possible, even if it's with a small group of test, maybe a certain market that you feel has the clientele that would likely to use the product. I think that's what it is. Then get that feedback and then use it to build and now to bring the actual product to market. So that's really what it is. Also, it stops the process of overthinking, I think, because your 80% could be the customer's 96%. And you're like, oh, I was actually really surprised. I was going to keep it back for, longer, thinking that I needed to do additional things to it. And maybe you didn't have to. Yeah.
That makes sense. I mean, that's something that we're learning with Meekono as well, where our journey, I mean, I'm very open about our journey as well, in the sense that we're iterating our product. And if I talk about the solution and my own personal journey of having started as a retailer, and then as a retailer trying to source African-made fashion and accessories, the journey I've had to go through on every point of the value chain, understanding how textiles are made, how difficult, getting consistent manufacturing, all of those things, and then arriving at Meekono to try and solve some of those problems, and even Meekono's change, iteration, that rings very, very true to me. I think that it's worth mentioning at this point as well that from the point when you were starting, there was no real internet research. Like I always encourage, like the amount of information that's out there right now
Exactly.
should really eliminate a lot of that overthinking and overinvesting in product, because
Yeah, It should, but could it be that there's too much information and therefore, if it's not quite how the information is presented, that holds us back? I mean, we had a lot of. I mean, in our days, I mean, there's the good and the bad, in terms of
Right.
it. So it would have taken longer to bring products to market, definitely, and definitely the internet has reduced that process. But I think there's so many examples now that are out there that it may hold back somebody who's trying to be creative and be different in that regard. So you could churn things out because you didn't know what else was out there. But now you just do a little research and you're like, oh my goodness, there's somebody who's doing almost exactly the same thing that I'm doing. How am I creative enough? So it has, pros and cons on both sides. Yeah. Mm,
And so
mm,
what does one do with that? I mean, I was talking to a jewelry maker based in Kenya just this morning. And if you think about the overabundance of a particular product type, Kenyan made jewelry is one of them. There's a lot out there.
mm,
So
mm.
his dilemma is how does he stand apart,
Yeah,
in a very,
yeah,
very competitive market. So maybe his problem is maybe don't get too much into it because otherwise you just get discouraged and never start.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, but I think definitely there is merit to it. There's merit to understanding where you are, where you should position yourself. And so maybe we can talk about how that whole process of being discerning with what information you seek out can actually help.
Mm,
And the flip
mm,
side of it is too much of it can
mm,
paralyze you
mm.
as
Yes,
well. Mm.
indeed. Yeah.
So when
Mm,
it comes to dealing, I had put a pin on when you said that you dealt with corporates. I know you've talked about how you were blasting spam, what's now known as spam. But what would you say are key things that people forget when they switch from doing retail, selling one-to-one, versus trying to sell to a corporate?
mm. I've not really been in this one-to-one. Oh, I did do one-to-one. Initially, very early in my journey, I did handmade wedding cards, right? And so I did a couple, maybe 2 or 3 weddings that went well, and then there was the wedding that didn't go well. And I remember this, but because if you're making handmade cards, they're not going to look exactly the same, right? Yeah. And these guys had brought in all this material from, I think, South Africa. And, we did a couple of samples for them. And of course, the first sample was approved. And before you go into mass production now with a team to do it. And I remember then on just when we were about to make the delivery, I think either one of the in-laws came to pick their batch of cards and they were mortified at the way the card looked. Yeah. And we had spent honestly, I think the whole weekend we hadn't even slept just doing these handmade cards. We had to do maybe 200 or 300 of them. And after that whole experience, I recall saying that I would never, ever, ever do handmade wedding cards again because the same amount of it took so much of time,
Mm.
and yet the what's it called, the return was so limited. I mean, each of them was like a work of art, and we were selling them for maybe at the time maybe $2, and it just didn't make sense. So I was at a point where also in my business where I was doing corporate work and I was also doing the work that gave me the most joy, which is really the creative handmade stuff.
Mm.
But it just didn't make any sense. So at that point is when I switched to saying I would only do corporate work. So that's when now we started really aggressive. So although my degree was in my major was in fine art, I mean in graphic design, I still had these minors that I was doing in multimedia, etc. That brought me a lot of joy, and I thought that I could continue to do that. But of course, with the experience of this wedding card experience, I just was like, forget it. I'll just call myself a graphic artist and will only do things that are on the computer and are not so emotive. And that's how we then deliberately moved into doing more corporate work, and that's what really grew the business. So I
Mm.
would still do invitations, and I would still do like invitations for events or niche things that were happening in Mombasa at the time in the hotels. But anything that I would do would be able to be mass produced. So it would be able, if I even made one prototype, it would just be for the purposes of the finished product, but it would be something that could be produced en masse for many people, even if it was an invitation. And that's how really I started getting into doing more of the corporate work. Now, the thing about corporate work as a creative, you may feel like you're selling out because
Mm.
the the input of a lot of the work that you're doing comes from the user, which is the client, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even if you feel that you could be, because design and creativity can be very subjective, I guess. So it depends on how you think that it should be done this way. But if the person who receives it doesn't understand the creativity behind it, then you're left spending more time explaining to them, but it's supposed to be like this, and da, da, da. And so you quickly begin to dull that side of you, and you just listen to the customer, and then say, okay, fine, I'll do this within the period of time because there's a deadline for it to be delivered, and therefore it kind of like limits how much emotion you're going to put into the work that you're doing. So that was really what made me start thinking, getting my mind more into thinking more corporate than as an artist, and limiting how much of the products that I brought to market, they were allowed to change and do anything they wanted with it. So it wasn't something that I was beholden to, and that really really helped in really, especially when you're doing things like logo design or just corporate presentations for things that they just, the one that you think that they're not going to pick is the one that they'll love, and you just get used to that and start delivering work like that. So there was a sense of disassociation that I think I learned over the years when I was doing corporate work as compared to work that was really that I would do for myself. Like now I'm able to do, of course, with my other businesses now. But at that time when you're building, it was really, everything was dictated by the corporate customer. And this is why sometimes the two things that I find that corporates struggle with creatives with is understanding a brief and sticking to it and not trying to deviate from the brief, and keeping timelines. So you could be the greatest artist out there, the greatest creative, the greatest creator out there, but if you cannot stick to a client's deadlines, they will not use you, and it's as simple as that. And I learned that quite early in the process. So many times pitching, not necessarily the best person, the best creative in the room, but definitely one who was able to stick to their timelines and therefore was able to deliver. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So what about the corporate's perception of value for money? I feel like if I love a dress, I'll pay, and then I'll forgive the dress if the dress isn't doing some things. Maybe the length isn't as long as I want,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever. Whereas
yeah,
my experience of corporates is they've got KPIs to meet.
yeah.
So I think that's another pitfall, potential pitfall that creatives need to look out for when they're dealing with corporate.
Yeah. You must stick to budgets. You must stick to budgets. It doesn't matter how lovely you'd like the eventual. Yeah, so you have to be able to stick to within budgets. Yeah, it doesn't matter how. I think what I have seen in my experience of when creators, especially now when we go into pitching for events, yeah,
Mhm.
most difficult thing that I see happening is a client gives you a brief, you're given the budget that you should deliver this creative, especially for events where you're having lots of moving parts. And then when you now pitch the creative idea, it is 4 or 5 times the client's budget. And I've seen that happen numerous times. And it
Okay.
doesn't matter. Yes, I know you want to have this beautiful gala event with all these dancers and the creativity and the room change. But if it's going to cost the client so much money, they can condemn you because they're like, why are you showing all the things that we cannot do when I'm telling you this is the things that we can do? So
Mm.
sticking to budget has been, I think, the biggest thing in terms of when you're bringing. So it's, I think, because you used the fashion example, it's like, is it haute couture and
Yeah.
putting stuff into, yeah. There's that. You always have to know what is it that you're presenting. And you could even have this fantastic idea which you can present on your machine and say, oh my gosh, if there was no budget, do that for your creativity, yeah. But then now begin to say, okay, this is fantastic. I still want to deliver this experience, right? But what would I cut down from this and present to the customer that would still give them to show the creative process that was involved if they had a huge budget? And I've seen even us pitch for jobs where we present this fantastic idea. And then we say, this is like if we had a champagne budget, but because this is the budget that you
Mm.
have, this is the creative process and this is it. And then they were like, we really liked that. Yeah.
Mhm.
How much more would it cost if we were to add that aspect onto to make our event particularly different. So being able to work like that with a customer is really, without it feeling like you're watering down your creativity, is really, really important. And this is something that all creatives are going to go through with corporates. There's no running away. We've even worked with like photographers who are world renowned, world renowned. We love them and whatever, but still, the client there's a ceiling to what a client is willing to or can get without it going through, unless it's like the CEO who runs the budgets or whatever. But usually, there's a ceiling that they can go to, and they still want to work with a top creative or a top producer, etc. But they'll still want you to work within the budget and share with them. I've also seen, and this is just came to mind when we were talking, I've also had an experience where a filmmaker, one of my very good friends, I said about, where the filmmaker came up with a very, very, very good idea. The film was excellent, and said, as a creative, you cannot interfere with my creative process. And we're not until the point of viewing the film, right? Yeah. And we were like, this cannot be aired. I mean,
oh no.
and we were like, you try and talk to the person and say, look, this is really wonderful, but we were commissioning you for this project.
Oh no.
I said, no, it's part of my creative process. So it's sad because
Oh.
even if all the paperwork was done and you signed off on the job, but nobody would ever view the beautiful work that was produced. So even as a creative, you have to think, is it also important for other people to see the quality of my work, or is it only important for me to stick to my creative process? So the work was done and paid for, but it'll never see the light of day.
Oh my goodness.
So you see, I think that you have to think through as a creative, what is more important to you? Yeah.
What does the client want? What does the market want? What does the market want? And another important point as well that I think applies is the importance of retention versus new customer acquisition. I think that from wearing the hat of a buyer, if I've had a bad experience with a maker, whether it's a case of I've imported and the quality was not good, but they sent it anyway, or the price ended up not working, or I had a negative experience along the way, I'm less likely to order again, especially if the price didn't work for me. And now I have, that now stepping into the shoes of a seller, the cost of acquiring a new customer on my time, effort, and money is higher than if the person comes back to me next year and says, let's top up and keep topping up for the next 5 years. So it's a message I try and drum home, but I'd like you to help me with this, to sort of say, sometimes we need to think about dealing with selling to businesses as a long-term investment rather than as a one-off investment. Yeah.
And I agree with you, Daphne, especially if you're working with a client that you actually like. Because sometimes that's what we see. Where you really love the customer, you love the work that you're doing, but why do you want to change this wonderful process simply because of an issue with maybe price? And maybe it's coming from a place where, now that I'm just thinking about it now, maybe it's coming from a place where maybe as a creative you don't feel like you have enough bargaining power, so you're kind of like putting a lot of emphasis on maybe the price point of something when that's not the problem. The problem is to retain the relationship that you have, because at least it's working for you than to sever it simply because of a price point. Yeah. And maybe that's where negotiation skill sets as creatives also becomes very important. What are you negotiating with yourself as a creative? What am I willing to give and what am I not willing to give? That's between you and yourself as the creative. And then now, once you understand that, when the product is in the market, you then now know what you can compromise on and what you can't. However, I think that, because I believe, Meekono, when you're dealing with, it's not what is it? It's a kind of like a mass market, because you'll be producing many of the same item, right? Even if each item is handmade. Am I right? Yeah.
Correct.
So I would not invest as a creative that much emotional energy in something that is going to be used for many. But if you are making a bespoke or something that's just maybe one, I think it's a very different conversation that you'd be having. And then I can see why you would hold back and say, you know what, I'm not willing to. But really, if this is a mass product that you're producing and sending out there, mass being, be it maybe 30, 40 pieces or up 4,000 pieces. How much energy do you want to really invest in that? Yeah.
And I know moving forward into your career, but I know that one of the things that you've done is you do, I don't know the terminology, but it's like packaged gift hampers, let's say, with creative products, with locally, because you're really, you promote local creativity and local craft so much. It's amazing. So one of the things you do is these sort of monthly gift packs. I'll let you explain, but the reason why I'm bringing it up is, what have you seen? Like when you put these products together, what makes you put them together? What's been the feedback? And what learnings can you share to other people who would want to be supplying to, let's say, corporates?
Yes, so the idea of the product is called Pat Streets, although I really need to get another name for that. Please suggest a name that doesn't have my name. But anyway, so we started during COVID, and I was just thinking of how can I, and because my customers are corporates, but the work that I do at Kayana Create, which is a community of female entrepreneurs, is really bring forward like these micro businesses, trying to get them to the next level. So bringing product that they're making to market. And I'm like, how can I do this? The COVID has come and I'm not able to hold events, but I do have this corporate database, and these entrepreneurs are sitting at home that I've been encouraging to, create products and bring them to market and not to give up. How can I bring the two, together? And that's where the idea of doing, they were actually called, there was a name for it, care boxes. That's what initially it's called them, care boxes. And care boxes was just to go out initially to their staff. And then as it became apparent, would be home for a little bit longer, and people were having virtual events to go to speakers, to participants, etc. And that's really how this gifting idea came. And it was easy now to pitch to the corporates that, hey, they are businesses that are producing fantastic things, but they're in their houses. But and we couldn't bring in things into the country anyway from China or whatever. So it was important to use products that were here. And so that's how the whole link really started. It's actually quite accidentally as well, because we had a bunch of stuff at home from an event what had been cancelled last minute, and that they were going to the attendees. We had about 120 little gift packs, and we're like, you know what? We're curfew, we can't go into people's homes, but we can certainly go around delivering these gifts to the attendees who had already paid to attend, and we didn't know when it would be open again. So that's what it started with. The response, they were able, because it was an international company, they were able to track and see the use. People posting it on social media, so they saw a need for it. So they called us again to do it. We did it with influencers, then eventually pitched with other corporates. And so that's how the gifting really spread. Now, to answer the second part of the question, which is what gifts have we seen work? Times we would pair, because our corporate clients are mainly international clients, we would pair, if it was a product-based business, we would pair it with, let's say, a handmade product. So for example, if you were doing, let's say, a hair treatment, we would put handmade hair bonnets inside the bag. So there was really linking the small business and the big business together. And so that worked for quite a while, I think. And then once COVID opened, we continued to do gift boxes for events based, and they were very thematic. So if we're dealing with a business that was in, for example, agricultural food systems, we would then think of what is the value chain of agriculture, and that would reduce food waste. And so we would put things like, let's say, chilies, for example, which shows the complete value chain inside the box. And that would, with a little card that shows these chilies were grown in X, Y, and and this is how we're distributing. So we would do things like that, and then always add a product that's a table product. Like maybe we would do ceramic mugs that were made at home. Just one other product that we'd put inside, but that would be really thematic. However, for generic gift boxes, what we have seen really, really does well is tea and tea byproducts. So tea, coffee, and any byproducts around that. So if you're doing something around that, that's value add for that. We saw that moved really easily. Non-personal items, so nothing, we wouldn't put like things like earrings, etc. But we could put, we did the Silicon Savannah when the president was going off to San Francisco, for example. We did things like this, which is really sort of personal item, and it gave a sense and a feel of, if you come and invest in Kenya, these are some of the things that we could put. Definitely the teas and coffees, and then we now put like an artifact inside that is easy to carry with the dignitaries when they were leaving. So we've seen things like that, and the key thing also to note for your creatives was, what is the price point of coffee and tea? Important. We're talking about $3, $10, And then so you have to have, I think the most important expensive thing was possibly this mass-made,
Mhm.
yeah, which was probably maybe $20. That was really the top end of the price because they were doing quite a number, and we couldn't. I think in many organizations have caps as to how much a gift box can cost, and many times it can't exceed $30 or $50. So you have to really think creatively around that.
Yeah.
Another thing that we've seen that's handmade, that has done really well, which is interesting, is the handmade bar soap. Yeah,
Mm. Mm.
because and then talk about the ingredients that are inside. There's a story to tell. Maybe that's the thing. It's a product that has a story to tell, and
Mhm.
then now it's much easier for corporates then to go it because it's handmade and it's made by the community. Let's say shea butter that's made
Mhm.
by the community,
Mhm.
etc. Those with stories to tell also tend to do really well, and they're at a really good price point
Mhm.
with corporates as well. So yeah, things like that, and then things that can be considered. Because one of the most difficult things has been to sell boxes that look different. And it
Mhm.
was something we have to keep telling the corporates, but these boxes are not being received by the same person. Yeah. So they don't have to be exactly the same.
Mhm.
So getting them, that mindset has been a real lesson. Like you can put teas, but the teas don't all have to be tea masala.
Yeah.
Have
Yeah.
different teas. And
Mhm.
sometimes the experience of them opening the box and seeing these different teas and people
Mm.
exchange for their flavors also becomes part of the gifting process that's really
Mhm.
interesting.
Mm.
So yeah, so those are some of the things we've seen come out of the box. And I'm trying to think of what else. But we learned this is all learning from experience because we would put personal, so like we'd put earrings, for example, in the box, and then somebody would receive it and there would be feedback. Oh, I have allergies, and I have.
Ah.
We
Okay.
quickly learned what to put in and what not to put in.
I asked this question, but I've accidentally stumbled upon an entire masterclass on you telling the story. If you saw me taking down notes, this is
Mm,
an entire case study on how to actually succeed as a creator of creative products. Because literally, if I start from the beginning, it was you started off in COVID, you had excess stock sitting there, you asked yourselves, what do we do? How do we turn these lemons into lemonade? How do we pivot to suit the circumstances we find ourselves in that are outside our control? Because you knew your buyer, you had your buyer and you understood your buyer, you were able to then anticipate what the buyer might need. And because you've developed a strong basis of trust with your buyers, you were able to put a product in front of them that maybe they hadn't,
yeah,
thought about before. So there's innovation in there. There's creative thinking and pivoting. Then you talk about putting a card in there telling the story of the product. So important within the creative space. Storytelling around the product. And if you know your customer, then the story you're telling will be one that resonates with them. And then you talk about sustainability as well. You talked about how that's become an important thing, but that derives from understanding again what the buyer is. So there's a lot of exchange of information, a two-way highway, like knowing the customer and being able to suggest products to them, testing, making
mm,
mistakes, and learning
mm,
from them. So it's a
mm,
constant learning process. So thank you for that lesson in how to create. I think that in itself is worth actually listening to the session that we're actually having. So you mentioned as well that you have Kayana Creates. Tell us a little bit more about Kayana Creates.
Yeah, so from my studio, when I opened my studio back in the year 2000, and it was a graphic design studio, really for 11 years, it ran, it's still running, but it ran in the format that I had imagined it would be for around 11 to 12 years. And of course, we transitioned quickly into corporate customers because realizing our investment was not going to work with bespoke stuff. So we acquired quite a large number of international corporate clients, but they were only coming to us at the tail end of whatever plans they had. So they would be like, okay, let's call, Miller to do for us, like the brochures and the banners and, the real tail end of. And so sitting back, I said, you know what? We need from 12 years of experience, and many times by the time the customer comes to us, we actually cannot deliver their dream event or dream product in time, simply because of timelines. So how can we be at the boardroom, in the inside, when they're making the decisions for whatever the product launch or event, etc., that they're doing? And so we discovered that we needed to change, to create a product within our business, which we called conferencing in a box, and it would be for those customers that were doing conferencing work, right? And we did it. It just became so. Those are the days when we still had pamphlets and brochures, and so it's just one part of the brochure would only talk about the conferencing product. But after a year, we discovered that had increased our business by over 25% in simply a year. So we were like, we're onto something here. We need to figure out how to get into the room. But a lot of the work that we're done is through what's it called? You kind of like have to apply to be a supplier in the organization.
Yes, pre-qualification, yes.
That's right. Yeah, so if we've come in as printer and branding, and then you're now coming in as this expert in conference management, that would be a completely different tender. So we decided to separate the businesses, registered conferencing in a box as a business of its own, and then now applied to be suppliers in those organizations, where we would come in as events experts at the planning stage of their business.
Okay.
So that's really what we did. And so that pivoted and really changed the way we run our business. But also gave me an opportunity to have a more strategic role in my business rather than being hands-on. And creative work can really be hands-on. And so was able to now take a more strategic look, sitting at different kind of tables and being able to understand the dynamics of bringing products and services to market. And so that was nice, but it doesn't take up a lot of my creativity. And so in 2018, 2017, I think, we had an opportunity. There was a property that was being put up next to our offices, and my team was like, Pat, we should buy a space there. So took up the challenge, deposited some money, and then anyway, when the 3 years later, they were handing back the property to us, and the assumption was that conferencing in the box would then move into that space. But by that time, I had my third child, and I had also written the book, A Candid Handbook for Women Doing Business. So I had really, really taken a step back from the day-to-day running of both the businesses. But I had started thinking of what else can I do? How about I share my experience, especially to the creative, economy, creatives around running a business. I could still see many people making mistakes that I wish I could share, from experience that, no, this is the way I did it, and I think it's kind of works. Maybe you can try that. So wrote the book, A Candid Handbook for Women Doing Business in Kenya. I was very, very ambitious and knew it would sell out, so I only printed 50 books. Never mind. It was out completely and that was when Instagram was just becoming a thing. I remember just putting it on Instagram. People asked me how much it is it? I think I guessed a figure, and they were like, okay, we'll buy. And the 50 were gone. So I was like, okay, I'm onto something here, really, seriously. So, maybe we should take this a little bit seriously. So then did a bulk order because of in the printing industry. Finally, the books came out, took them into the bookstore with confidence, in quotes, and they sold out in the bookstores as well. So I was like, who are reading these books?
Who are these people?
Then the entrepreneurs that I had featured in the book were, because they're type A personalities, they're like, you are writing a book so that nobody can read them. I mean, why are you surprised? The stories are about us. We're experts. And they insisted they wanted to have some kind of an event. So in the 2016, I think, towards the end of the year, then had an event, expected with about actually my goal was to have 25 women in the room. We ended up having 60. And then the place where we launched, we had the event, was like, you have to have it again next month. This is crazy. Had probably doubled the numbers. By the time we were going into the next year, I had to take a break and to think through, okay, what is it I'm actually doing? But since there was already proof of concept, taking your product to market when you're not sure, there it was. The market told us ready for an event that was really around female entrepreneurship, telling candid and stories around their journey as an entrepreneur. So that's how Candid Conversations, Circles for Women in Business was born. And we did that for maybe 3 years, just until COVID, I would say. And when, of course, COVID then kind of like we were hosting it 4 times a year, 5 times a year. But COVID really rattled us and, and we're home. And at that time was also when I was being handed the keys to this space where the conferencing business, never mind there was no conferencing happening during it, was supposed to move into. And that's where the whole idea then came, why don't we create this community, this place which would be a community for female entrepreneurs where we can host more niche events for female entrepreneurs that can support them and help them in business. We can have one-on-one conversations with other founders and share our experiences and just form a sense of community, together as entrepreneurs in Kenya. And that's how Kayana was really birthed. So we kitted out the space, and that's basically where we are now here in Nairobi. And the community just grew, especially during COVID, because although the space was not being used, we had already launched the community. So a lot of things that were online, we could get a lot of women at home who had all these nascent ideas about starting businesses, so they could toy with it. So really, we had a lot of programs running online virtually, and then by the time the curfews were lifted, we had a pretty big and vibrant community. Right. And so that's how Kayana Create started, and we're there for community capacity building and collaborations, where we collaborate with institutions that also are working with female entrepreneurs to bring to kind of like bridge the gap that is there, where many women think that there are obstacles, be it regulation or opportunity or financing, and bring those institutions together and just share the experiences and where the two players can meet. And basically that's what Kayana is about. Yeah. Really, that's where my passion is. Really love it. I love the work that I do at Kayana. I love meeting entrepreneurs and just listening to their journeys and sharing their experiences. Yeah.
I remember attending one of those. It was in the months immediately before COVID. Attending.
That's right. Yeah. When we had one of our cottage expos.
Yes, cottage industry. Yes.
Yeah, which we've now hosted almost 6 times now. Yeah.
And what have you found has changed, or what interesting observations have you made from hosting 6 cottage industry expos?
The big thing is more businesses. The quality of the businesses that now are participating is very, very different from in the beginning. So where there was more crafty kind of businesses, we're now finding businesses that are women who have really invested. They've gotten if it's a product that you bring to market, you have the formulation, you own it, you have all the necessary, like in Kenya, we have what it's called KEB sticker, which is really a regulatory body that then certifies your product. And I'm seeing more and more products that are coming to market. Women are actually investing time and energy in ensuring that the product has got the necessary regulations for it to be retailed. So that's one of the big things that we saw as compared to the first time. We're also seeing older entrepreneurs as well coming into the market, which is really interesting. So we have people who have gone through their career, etc., and have always had this idea. And so they now come in and are bringing really high quality products actually into the market. We've seen quite a bit of that. And young people, we see a lot of young entrepreneurs as well who are they're going into spaces that ordinarily we would say maybe male, or like agriculture, for example. Right. We're finding a lot more women going in and doing really interesting things around value add when it comes to products that are coming to market, and really, really good quality and consistent, because there's a consistency that is required as well when you're building a business. So those are the things that I have seen. What I'd like to see more of is possibly more of, I would love to see people clamoring for desks and us saying that, oh, we're all sold out, or there's not enough space. I would like to see a lot more of that. But the community really does help, because we keep an eye, we can see interesting products. We're always watching out for interesting products, trying to get to know who the entrepreneur is, if they're meeting if they have any challenges, how can we support them? So that's really nice when we see, and they're in cohorts. So these cohorts would have women in beauty, women in fashion, women in agriculture. So once the cohorts begin to grow, you will always see the premium products beginning to rise above, and meet entrepreneurs who are so serious and so committed to bringing quality products to market, and it's really exciting. That's been exciting. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And it's there's something to be said then about creating fertile ground for people to.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh my God.
There is.
So I'm also, when you talk about the different cohorts, I've heard you speak about this. I myself am a big champion for collaboration, and there's just strength and unity in numbers. How can, with what you've seen already, how do you think collaboration could be leveraged, amongst these cohorts, or how have you seen collaboration being leveraged between them? Yeah.
I'll give you an example. We really need to do this with Meekono. I know so that the next time when we talk, we would have done this. Is because we have all these entrepreneurs, I'll talk about one particular collaboration that I think was great. We have an online platform known as Baki, Baki Beauty, which is a platform for beauty products, and they were looking to expand the repertoire of local products. So we know a lot of beauty products. Many women and men are really leaning towards natural African products, right? Yeah, and with less, is it parabens? I'm not sure about the terms. So there's a lot of education around what people are putting on their bodies. And so they had launched, they've launched an online platform, and one of the biggest problem is getting these really niche products into a mass market, or people, even accessibility, people being able to access them. And so we then partnered with Baki Beauty and had a cohort of entrepreneurs around, I think it was 18 or 19. They paid a very less than $50 to be part of the community, and they went through different stages so that they would be ready for their products to be launched on the e-commerce platform, because that's an important process. People have to understand how it works and how the distribution is done and why they need stock. So we did that as a partnership, and then graduated the class after 8 weeks, I believe. And then technically what was to happen is a lot of them were supposed to be then onboarded onto the platform, although that was a slow process, but that's for other reasons, yeah. But they were generally, anybody who graduated should have been ready to then be onboarded onto the platform, yeah. And that guaranteed at least a steady supply. They knew the minimum numbers of units that they needed to be on board, what customers were asking for. So a lot of that data was really shared, and then how to shoot their products in order for those images then to be uploaded. Right? So things like that. So that's one of the that would be a cohort on its own, which is very collaborative, and has worked with another organization that's working with people in the beauty industry, which happen to be women, primarily women. So I think that's a really good example. We've also had a great partnership that we did with Visa, which was She's Next program, which they run around, across continents. And that was also a good collaborative effort, because we managed to get entrepreneurs, of course, to participate in that competition. And then once they had won the competition, we kept that community together in Kayana. So everybody who had gone through the final, we think we got 26 entrepreneurs, and we kept them in a cohort. We did a 6-week training with them, and then kept them within that same cohort. And then when opportunities are being offered, because you really know their businesses. And we, of course, as Kayana, get asked a lot of times to nominate entrepreneurs for various things. We're able to pick from that cohort because we know they've been trained well, and they went through an intensive pitching process and met a certain criteria. We can really just move those entrepreneurs when the opportunity is coming up, and when we're asked to nominate businesses, we're able to do that. So those are just one of the many collaborative areas in which we work with various people within the ecosystem.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. We as Meekono are, we see collaboration as a way to even de-risk. It's a way to de-risk what you do. It's a way to scale up what you do, because you are able to talk to bigger players as a group. In a lot of cases, especially when you're an SME. I mean, for us to get to the point where we are standing up to and knocking on the door of a big bank or whatever, without a community, it's very, very difficult.
And they won't really speak. These institutions don't want to talk to individuals. They want to know that as part of a larger group of people. Yeah.
And then it moves into the area of advocacy as well. There's a lot that we need. We need funding. We need regulation that is more sort of friendly towards these particular sort of, let's call them niche or marginalized sectors. So I believe in the power of collaboration, and it's inspiring, because I did know about the Visa Who's Next program. So that was exciting. Within that sort of same space around collaboration, I think role modeling and role modeling, I don't know whether that's a thing. You are a role model. I mean, to be able to get you to sit down, that took a while.
But that was not on me, Daphne.
Yeah, but no, you are somebody who a lot of people look up to. You, in your own various different ways, you're a mentor, you're a sort of community leader. and all those things. I think my question is, I feel like we all have a part to play. We can be the role model or the mentor or the leader of various things. So what's your word of encouragement to somebody who is doing their own thing, but maybe could actually be somebody else's role model?
I think it's sharing. We have to share our stories, and we've talked a little bit around storytelling, but it's extremely important that there are more stories out there. Don't say that, but Daphne's already doing this and Pat's already doing that. Our journeys are so unique, and there's somebody who's going to resonate with your particular journey. I mean, we're talking about a continent of how many billions? Even if you you influence like 100,000 women who resonate with your story, that's already impact, So I think the big thing is being able to tell stories, and you don't need, Daphne, I'm completely introverted. I know you're also introverted. It doesn't need, you don't need to be this extrovert walking out there and, sharing let me tell my story. But there's a comfort in your own personal journey that's so authentic, and that people will really resonate with somebody who will be like, look, if Pat's doing it, I know I can do it. Yeah. And I think for me, that's extremely important. I didn't start the journey in any way of thinking of myself as a mentor or, in terms of that. I just wanted to share my journey of running my small business, and how that has been for me. And interestingly, through that journey is when I was like, oh, you mean I can tell this story to not only Kenyans, I can tell it to Ugandans, and I can tell it to Nigerians, and I can tell it in Europe, and there's still women who it resonates with. And I think for me, that's really what keeps me going in terms of continuing to tell a story that sometimes sounds like I've overshared it, but you haven't, just keep doing it.
Yeah.
But also, I think one of the most beautiful things, though, is getting just the feedback from somebody who listened to you speak. You didn't know they existed before then. Listen to you speak. You find that then they follow you on your socials. They then attend an event where you are. They then come and speak to you and say, hey, Pat, I really thought that this part of your story really resonated with me. And I'm like, oh, really? There's somebody actually listening. So it also encourages us as the storytellers. And then they go then full circle, come into Kayana, participate in the programs, win the awards, share the opportunities. Then they say, I'm also going to do this. And it's just so wonderful to hear. I'm doing it within my community as well, of women who I feel that I can pay it forward to them. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. So certainly never thought of myself as a mentor or a coach or whatever word you want to use there, but I was just a woman telling her story about running a small business and the impact that it's had over the 25 years. Yeah.
Oh, what a wonderful way to close. I think that is just amazing. That is really, really amazing. And just to underline the point you've made, you don't have to be a celebrity or some kind of superstar in order to inspire somebody. I, for one, I think in my early years of starting a business, because I worked in traditional industries, I worked in the banking sector for a very long time. And I dove straight into the deep end of entrepreneurship. And if I hadn't listened to, I tell you what, I've got role models who I will never ever meet. Those people, listening to their stories on podcasts, just back to back on podcasts. If I hadn't listened to those people and their vulnerability and their openness, saying how often they'd failed, telling me stories about their failures, and me thinking, oh, so I'm not an anomaly. Maybe failure isn't a sign that I should quit. It's actually an opportunity for me to learn. If I hadn't had those experiences, I would not be sitting here today having this conversation with you. So I really truly believe that this conversation itself as well will inspire many people. And so I would like to thank you so much for your consistent vulnerability and your generosity, and for sharing your story. And hopefully we can have you back in whatever the next series we have of these fireside chats, Pat. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daphne, for having me, and for your patience as well and making this happen. Thank you.